Thanks everyone for joining in. Today's session is to discuss the new measure announced by the government on July the 20th in relation to the student visa arrangements. Maybe a quick reminder of what these changes were. Firstly, it was about recommencing granting of student visas in all locations outside of Australia, so that the students who have already visas and are able to make arrangement to travel when borders reopen. Secondly, international students will be able to lodge a further student visa application free of charge if they're unable to complete their studies within the original visa validity due to COVID-19. The third measure was around student visa holders studying online outside of Australia due to COVID-19 will be able to use that study time to count towards their post-study work rights. Also, graduates who held a student visa will be eligible to apply for post-study work visa outside of Australia if they're unable to return due to COVID-19. And the last measure was about additional time given to applicants to provide English language results where COVID-19 has disrupted access to these services. So these announcements were most welcome by the TAFE network, and as these changes will allow us to now be more on par with some key competitors who had already some of these measures in place, such as the UK, Canada, or New Zealand. That being said, the TAFEs have a number of questions and clarifications and comments. So we would like to maybe take the time to have a bit of a discussion with you on those. I have noted that clarification email on the visa fee waiver was sent today by Home Affairs. So sorry, I will send that to the network after the meeting. So some questions are clarified there, but if you don't mind, some of the questions still relating to that. And of course, many thanks to you and your team to making yourself available as well again and talking to us today. So the format of the session, a Q&A as in previous times. So the usual reminders, please introduce yourself before asking your question and keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. And before we start, maybe I would like to pass the floor to Matthew for some introductory words, if you would like.
Thanks, Ewa. Just firstly, I notice I've logged in as my wife, but it is indeed me. You can see Caroline Noble there. She must have used Zoom on this computer, so sorry about that. But no, thanks very much for the opportunity to meet with you again today, and I'm very happy to elaborate on some of those visa measures. In particular, some of the processing arrangements that we're sort of putting into place. And as we've done with the nil VAC form feedback, we're still very keen, of course, to take on feedback and refine our processes and indeed policy settings as we move forward. I think, one thing that obviously these decisions from government on the 20th of July, very welcome, etc. But as with everything to do with COVID-19 and the various impacts and disruptions, this is not the sort of end destination point, of course. So, again, thanks very much for having the opportunity to get together and to hear your questions and concerns and feedback, etc., because that really enables myself and Erin Turner, who's on the line from my team, and I think Hannah might be joining us as well, to continually refine what we're doing and, provide advice to government on where we need to get to, and just sharpen up all our information, whether it's on forms or whether it's on websites, etc., to best support you and your students at this time. So, very happy at this point just to maybe take some questions, and we can dig into any concerns or issues you see presenting at this point in time.
Wonderful, thanks Matthew, and we really appreciate that. So let me now open the floor to the participants and start our Q&A session.
Janelle Chapman from TAFE Queensland. Hi Matthew, how are you?
Hi Janelle, I'm well, how are you?
Good. Just a couple of things. I'm not sure if it was addressed in the email you've sent back to Eva this morning, but in the form, I sent around a question or a query to the network yesterday afternoon. Part C and number 6 and 7 refers to course deferral. In the instance of most of us in the TAFE world, we didn't necessarily defer people, but because the students couldn't complete their practical component, the extension was obviously needed. So we just want to know how to address that part on the form. So do we just cross out deferral, put suspension, or do we just assume that, you know, it's okay to put it in even if it wasn't really a deferral?
Yeah, thanks, Janelle. Yeah, we got your feedback through you yesterday, and a couple of other universities have sort of contacted us about this point. When we were sort of drafting up the form, I suppose we were anticipating the kind of majority position for students would be around that sort of deferral event. But we are conscious that there will be other circumstances, say like reduced study loads, going to part-time because of COVID impacts, and also sometimes work-based training not being able to take place because of social distancing and shutdowns in terms of some of those locations, etc. So, yeah, on reflection, the form probably narrowed. We were probably thinking of deferrals in the broad sense, but you know, they do have a sort of technical meaning here. So we're going to do two things. One thing, we just sent some interim advice around that you had just referenced before, which invites that sort of other information to be attached to the form. But what we're doing at the moment is we're actually going to build in that capacity into the form as well to make that clearer moving forward, that we would look to extend it to those other, allow the form, we're always wanting to extend it to those other scenarios, but allow the form to, I suppose, make a little bit more sense in those broad categories that you outline that may also relate to COVID-19 disruptions that didn't trigger a sort of technical deferral, as it were. So, yep, refined form on its way, but sent out today through the EVCC was just some interim advice to pick up on those points before the form gets updated in the coming days.
All right, thank you. And the other one I have is there's obviously a not unexpected increase in inquiries from the Hong Kong market at the moment.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But what we're finding is the profile of the applicants is expanding. So, you know, an increase in age or educational background is different to what it has been in the past. We're just wondering if you have any market intel about the Hong Kong market and how Home Affairs are actually looking at processing students from that market. What are the thoughts?
Yeah, no, thanks, Janelle. So obviously, I think back on 9th of July, the PM announced a range of measures to do with Hong Kong, and there were some visa settings in there, particularly around eligibility for the postgraduate work visa. So they were all Hong Kong 485 holders were extended by 5 years if they're existing 485 holders from that date up to 8th of July 25, and when they lodge now, they'll get that 5-year validity. So there's also other things happening in the skilled space as well, around TSS and pathways to permanent residence, etc. So what we do obviously anticipate, and what we're hearing broadly from the industry, is that has stimulated some demand from Hong Kong in the student space. We're not actually seeing that translate into visa lodgements at this stage. That could be due to, of course, the whole sort of travel restriction, processing settings, etc., overseas and in Hong Kong. So we're not necessarily seeing it bubble through in terms of visa lodgements, but we do understand there is increased sort of communications with providers and indeed some, you know, increased enrolment. So things, I suppose, to answer your question, in terms of our kind of broad external and internal risk settings, we've got to wait to see what those visa applications look like before we're in a position to kind of, I suppose, broadly comment on the caseload as such and how the profile might be shifting. So it's early days for us, but we would certainly be interested in any of that sort of, I suppose, initial sense that providers such as yourself were seeing around that sort of profile of someone who's making inquiries or indeed enrolling.
So would you like us to just send through to Eva any?
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be great. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah. So anything, we'd obviously, of course, the broad intent here from government is around increasing numbers and participation broadly from Hong Kong, and visas and the settings are being used as a lever there. But of course, we want to ensure that that's done in a measured way and quality isn't compromised, and because that broader intent is, of course, to maintain all that quality moving forward. So yeah, look, anything that you're seeing would be welcome. So we can sort of make sure that we're well positioned in terms of making good decisions as those visa applications come through. Just one other comment about Hong Kong and generally is that like a lot of locations overseas, there are still those sort of disruptions around some of the visa assessment dependencies, whether that be panel doctor health checks and biometric collection. We would suspect that processing as it ramps up and we get some good demand in terms of visa lodgements would be a bit slow from there, but we are working with actually our service delivery partner who collects biometrics for us, etc., around some partial reopenings to make sure that visa applicants from places like Hong Kong are able to get in and provide biometrics, so we can get on with finalising visas from places such as Hong Kong to meet the demand that we hope is coming.
Okay, great. So I will, as a follow-up, try to collect some student profiles so that you know what to expect when the application is coming. That's great.
Great. Yep.
Also, just a request for everyone to mute because I think we have some background noise. So that would be most appreciated if you could mute yourselves. Any more questions?
Hi Matthew, this is Clara from William Anglis TAFE. Just a quick question about currently we got students studying and we know that course end date will be extended, but their visa is not expiring until next year August. So should they lodge a new visa application now so that the fee is waived, or are they going to wait until July next year, and will the fees be waived next year or the year after?
Yeah, good question. So the nil VAT provision, there's no sort of sunset clause on it, as it were. So nil VAT for COVID disruption is going to be in place as long as that disruption takes place. So if we're still looking at a proposition in late 2021 where courses are having to be deferred and they're being broadly impacted by COVID travel restrictions still, there's every expectation, of course, that this measure would stay in place to address those impacts. So there's no end date, firstly, but secondly, going to your actual question in terms of when a student should apply for and avail themselves of the nil VAT and extend their visa. So we generally say to a student that they should apply 6 weeks before they need a new visa. What this allows for really is to take account of any change that may be coming forward. So my concern, I suppose, in a student acting too early, if their visa was, say, expiring July next year, but they're already anticipating a 6-month delay in the course, would be they apply now, and no doubt we'll go ahead and finalise and grant them that new period. But if in February, March, there was further disruption that then pushed the course date out, they might need to do another application in a year or two's time. So I would say that, you know, given what I said before about there being no expectation around this measure disappearing until we're satisfied that all COVID disruption has been resolved, there's not a lot of risk in a student waiting and hopefully only having to go through the visa application process one more time to satisfy that disrupted course period. So I would probably recommend holding off, but that's not, you know, that's not to say that if an application came in, we wouldn't sort of look to facilitate where we could.
Thank you.
Sorry, if I can just jump in with one other question. Chris from TAFE Western Australia. It's a follow-up to Janelle's previous question about Hong Kong, really. Obviously, as Janelle's highlighted, there's some uncertainty around receipt of applications from Hong Kong and how they're handled. We're seeing that increase as well, but that uncertainty also exists within the agent network. That's something else that's come through. So I guess I'm just wondering if there's any messaging that's coming out through official channels, be it Home Affairs or perhaps Austrade, to the agents as to what will help guide them during these times.
Yeah, look, it's probably something for our Austrade and or DESI colleagues in terms of that messaging to some of those groups, as you mentioned, like agents who will work with students to, you know, support that demand more broadly. We're as well positioned as we can be to meet the sort of visa lodgement demand that should flow through that sort of broader, you know, stimulated interest from Hong Kong. But it is probably a matter for Austrade and DESI, and we will certainly support them in that messaging to those sorts of agent groups. I'm not aware, to be honest, of any sort of targeted information out of sort of the Canberra Austrade DESI constructs, but I know overseas that the consulate there in Hong Kong, Home Affairs representatives and also Austrade have done some local messaging around, you know, the measures broadly announced by the PM and how they sort of translate into the student space. And of course, for us, that sort of 485 pathway. So there has been some local messaging. I don't know if these took place, to be honest, but last time I heard they were setting up sort of regular local kind of webinars with agent groups, etc. But it might be, you know, in terms of that sort of broad messaging, it's probably something to maybe raise with DESI and Austrade, and we'll certainly, when we speak to them next, we'll certainly, as they are aware of this sort of increasing demand from Hong Kong, just sort of, you know, obviously sort of say from a student setting perspective, you know, any messaging that can go out to those agent networks and indeed, you know, providers who draw from that market would be very, very useful.
Great, thanks. And we are happy also to pass on that that information to the DC and Austrade online.
Yep, thanks.
Can I please ask another question, Matthew, about OHC health cover for international students? I think that has come up quite many times.
Yeah.
Especially for offshore students who actually lodged their visa application waiting for the border to open, and they were still waiting for the visa to be granted, and yet they pay OHC already. Yeah. That won't be used until they landed. So just wondering, what's the best practice you think you can recommend?
Yeah, look, this is an issue. It's got to be said in terms of you know, sort of facing the realities here in terms of a student being able to reasonably, you know, access the thing that they're paying for, given that they're sitting overseas. And so I can only really answer it from a visa perspective. So currently there's two, I suppose, really key circumstances in which we require, from a Home Affairs visa perspective, a student to hold overseas student health cover. Under our legislation, we require a student to hold that cover at the time of visa grant for the duration of their course and the duration of their visa. And that's to ensure that at such a time as they arrive into Australia, they've got that cover. The second key reason from a visa perspective or requirement for them to hold it is when they're in Australia. So there's a condition that compels a student on their visa to hold that cover whilst they're in Australia. So what we've been clear with the Department of Health is that they're the two circumstances that we require under our legislation a student to hold it. Now, noting that there might be periods of time that a student needs to sit overseas due to travel restrictions, there's different sort of measures at play there around what a student needs to do with that health cover. Department of Health and/or health providers need to work with the students on those scenarios as they may unfold. It's something that we're aware of. It's something that currently we're not changing our settings on. And noting that sort of broad responsibilities, sit around that with Department of Health.
Okay, thanks, Matthew. Just another quick question. Got too many questions. For students who are planning to start in February 2021, got visa granted in September this year, but the border, for example, is not opened until July, so the visa will be 6 months short. So as a provider, what should we do? We should issue another COE, and then they would just have to keep the visa they have been granted already and just extend it later on?
Yeah. So what was the time frame, sorry, in the scenario? So they get granted in September.
They were supposed to start in February 2021, got visa granted in September this year, but the border is not opening until July 2021.
Right, okay. So so in that case, their course will go beyond the visa. Yeah, so I suppose it goes to that sort of at what point do they do something? What would be best, I suppose, is if they lodge that visa in anticipation of that course disruption. So the COE took into account the course disruption, so we could, grant the visa for the full period, so they didn't need to do anything. Noting that, of course, this is a fast-moving situation, and none of us really know when borders will be open or when students can return to Australia. The other scenario, of course, is that they lodge in September with a COE. We do our best to, grant the full duration of that. They come on shore and, they realise that course disruption, and then we would ask the provider to issue a new COE, and they would lodge a further visa application. And I would say in this scenario that you outlined, they would be eligible for the nil back, and they lodge again for free, and we give them the adjusted time period on a new visa.
Laura from TAFE South Australia. I got two questions regarding the Form 1545. The first one, a lot of our students have multiple COEs. So one complete the form. Which COE is the last COE, the COE for the principal course we pull, or which one?
Yeah, principal course COE.
Principal course COE.
Yeah.
Okay, second question. We have students on university pathway programs. So the principal course actually is with the university. So will they complete the form, or the principal course provider complete the form?
Yeah, look, I would be suggesting it would be the principal provider that we, from a sort of PRISM's interactive, how we interact with PRISM through DESI with Home Affairs, is we work on the principal COE. So I would suggest that should probably be coming through from the principal COE provider. and that would then match up with what we saw in our system. Would that cause any problems for you? Would you then, is there any sort of visibility concerns for you in terms of that happening, noting that I suppose it could get tricky if the course disruption is realised by yourselves, but you would have to communicate with the, you know, the other principal provider to assist the student in lodging. I could see that that could be slightly kind of administratively confusing, but again, then it would probably be the student timing their new visa application and availing themselves of the nil VAC would probably do that later on in the piece. So when they are studying with that principal provider, unless the course disruption was so significant, it happened with you guys in that sort of pathway time frame, which hopefully won't be something that is realised in time frames, you know, and how long travel restrictions go for. But if we got to that sort of circumstance, you know, that's probably something that we need to sort of think through. It might be that you would need to work together with that sort of principal provider to get them to sign off on the 1545 form. But I'm hoping that it wouldn't come to that in terms of time frames. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. It's just kind of like a long period moving forward, and it's like a domino effect, you know. And when we update COEs, for example, a lot of students in our college package from certificate level to diploma, then moving into a bachelor degree at a university. So when we, if the certificate 3 is impacted, that means we probably have to update 3 of our own COEs. Affected as well. It's also be early to say because our education program area is still working at catching up. We hope that we will help the student, you know, with additional activities to catch up what they miss in terms of, but that's right. People that won't be able to.
No, thanks very much for flagging that, and we'll keep that in mind in terms of, you know, if these sorts of impacts keep going, you know, we'll certainly engage with you all about that and how administratively we can work through that, not wanting you guys to have to do sort of unnecessary kind of, you know, COEs, new COEs, working with principal providers, etc. So no, thanks for passing that on, and we'll certainly keep that in mind. And let's hope we don't need to, you know, that travel restrictions don't last, you know, beyond, you know, the shorter time frames that we're all hoping, so we don't get into some of this. But we would be very happy to engage at such a time as it starts becoming problematic.
Great, thank you so much. And I just recall another question, which was from the IEAA QA the other day. And I think took it on notice. You're going to go back and check with your processing team and come back to us about how you want us to treat the start date on the COE. If we are COE as a pass.
No, we've got IEAA actually just sent through those questions we took on notice last night, actually. So, someone tapping away on their thing. It's quite loud.
Another request to mute yourselves, please. Thanks.
I think my AirPods really picked up that tapping. We've got that. We just got all those questions on notice last night, actually, from IEAA. So we'll hopefully come out on those with some advice in the next day or two. So that is one of them. So we'll certainly provide an update on that point.
Matthew, can I ask? It's Ashish from TAFE New South Wales.
Hi.
Hi. With the form 1545, is the fee waiver a automatic? Is that going to be a given? Is it a formality once we have completed that 1545, or do we expect some back and forth for further information?
Yeah, well, I mean, what we're hoping is that it is once the form is completed, education provider signs off on the disruption, that in the large majority of cases, we just keep on moving. We want to take a very flexible approach. You know, clearly the intent of government in announcing this nil VAC is to ensure that no student is disadvantaged broadly. And, you know, part of that is them not being required to pay an application charge for a visa application that they, you know, didn't intend, and it was outside of their control. So what we want to do in terms of operationalizing that is make sure it's as streamlined as possible. And that's why we want to get the form as functional as possible. And some of the feedback from Janelle and others is really good as we seek to refine that to make sure it is the light touch process, and the student, you know, keeps on continuing with their visa application. So in answer to your question, I would anticipate that, you know, all things being equal, and the student, of course, you know, being eligible for the nil fee, that there won't be any toing and froing, and it goes through as a nil charge. So it's not like the student gets, you know, charged, then we refund or anything. It goes through as a nil charge. So, you know, no money exchanges hands, etc. So we're certainly working on the basis of it being a light touch process, and the form is our vehicle to make it that sort of streamlined process. Because when we were kind of thinking about how to kind of implement it, of course, you know, as you would expect, you know, government does, if we're going to waive $620, you know, we need some rigor around the process, and we were looking at different options around, you know, prisms being updated by providers with, you know, some comments around COVID disruption, and/or you know, letters. But we settled on the form as hopefully administratively being a streamlined process for providers. So, you know, you've got one form, you complete it, and off it goes. And, you know, from our end, it will hopefully be very efficient. Noting, you know, we've got a global visa processing network. So you've got people, you know, in Belgrade looking at it, you've got people in Adelaide looking at it. So where we can, you know, same look and feel is very good for efficiency. One question that's come up at the moment, and this is, I suppose, particularly relevant for all of you in Victoria, is around sort of the signing of the form. And again, I mean, we would take a very reasonable, flexible approach there in terms of electronic signatures, given that, you know, we don't want, certainly in Melbourne, Victoria, you know, students having to, you know, traipse around, getting bits of paper signed, noting that a number of you are at home and working, etc. So, yeah, I don't know if it was, a couple of people I think have raised it with us recently, and of course very happy to accommodate those sort of sensible arrangements around the form at this time.
Thanks, Matthew. Thank you for that.
Yes, Matthew. Just a quick question, Matthew. For those started online studies offshore in July,
Yep.
Will they be given priority or for the visa applications? And how do we indicate that?
Yeah. So does that go to their potential 485 eligibility?
If they start online study, will the visa process be quicker and faster and be given priority because they started their studies already offshore?
Yeah. So I mean, yes. I'll probably answer that linking in the sort of 485 eligibility issue. So the visa measure announced by the ministers was around sort of some of the online offshore study counting towards 485 eligibility down the track, and that's been limited to student visa holders, so both current student visa holders and anticipating new student visa holders. So to do online study, count towards 485 eligibility, the current settings are that you must hold a student visa. So together with that July cohort, we're very mindful of that interaction now in terms of requiring a visa in that offshore online study. So to the extent that we can, we're looking to, of course, prioritise that group. I'll just make mention just around some of our visa processing settings as well, because another one of the 5 announcements from the ministers was that we're recommencing processing and finalisation of our full global caseload now. So hopefully some of you through your interactions with agents or other groups have started to see some of that activity. There's been a massive uptick, a really pleasing uptick in the last couple of weeks around you know, how many visas we're finalising overseas. So I would just say though that some of the visa services, some of the services that visas have dependencies on, English language testing, biometric collection, and also panel doctor health checks do remain patchy in different locations. So what that will mean is that there will be some caseloads, because of a range of, you know, disruptions, will take a bit longer to process. But we're going to do all we can to, you know, prioritise all those decision-ready applications. But when you're talking to students or agents, you know, I think we do need to be probably, you know, upfront on the fact that despite best efforts, if students aren't able to get you know, medical appointments, etc., for a period of time, that is something that we will need to wait for if required in the context of a visa assessment. So again, I suppose pointing to the situation in Victoria at the moment, you know, the services that we rely upon to do some of those health checks are disrupted. You know, there's disruptions there, and appointments are stretching out. So as you would very much appreciate, I'm sure, where we can apply flexibility, we will for a student to make sure they're visaed. But on things such as health checks, etc., you know, we've got to wait for those checks to come in to ensure those requirements are met.
Thank you.
So I guess this brings us to the elephant in the room, which is the fact that students who have started online delivery offshore and follow the advice that there is no need for submitting visa applications once studying offshore could be disadvantaged with the current measures. So do you have any comment on that?
No, thanks. And you know, this has been raised a couple of times, and I think I can probably say to you all, noting, you know, you're plugged into various other discussions, including IEAA. I think a few of you were on that webinar, and Phil Honeywood being the chair, of course, of that particular, being a convener of that webinar and obviously in charge of IEAA. He made some comments there publicly around further lobbying of government in terms of who was in scope for their online study to be counted towards 485 eligibility. The position landed on the 20th of July was that current and new student visa holders were in scope. So like I said, meaning you must hold a student visa for that online study. What that meant, what that decision has effectively meant, is that anyone non-visaed, you know, whether it go back to March or July or in the future, will not have that time counted. Now, Phil mentioned that you know, lobbying of government continues to look at broadening that group to include either anyone who's studying online with an Australian provider, or anyone who's applied for a visa to have that study counted towards 485. Now, he was pretty clear that him and others continue to lobby government on that. I can only obviously speak to the decision of government at this point in time, and it is limited to that student visa holder. So if there were to be any changes, of course, you know, we would communicate that as soon as possible. Completely understand the issue. On the comment around, you know, students also being advised not to apply for a student visa at this time. I'll note that, you know, obviously I completely understand the connection towards 485 eligibility, but that advice at that time was both pragmatic and reflecting the situation, I suppose, at the time of broad-based travel restrictions, that we had paused offshore processing. There was the inability for students to get any of those services for visas around English language testing, biometric collection, and even health checks. So it was pragmatic advice given that is still technically correct today, that a student does not need a visa to study online. Completely note the connection now in terms of further decisions that have been taken around 485 eligibility, and completely understand why, you know, broadly across industry, that's a point on which they will continue to lobby government around that. But, you know, that was a point in time correct piece of advice that's technically still correct today, noting that, of course, you know, it is actually a relatively you know, small proportion of our huge student populace that do go on to the 485 pathway. So that advice was to the broad student group at the time.
And maybe another follow-up question. As you say, visas cannot be processed until all the underlying documentation has been submitted as well. And there was one of the measures was around flexibility on the delays in English, but the delays might won't help the students, you know, submit the IELTS test, which is at the moment the only one that's, you know, that is accepted. So a question about whether there is any thinking at the department level on allowing for further flexibility, not only in terms of timing, but also in terms of the type of test that would be accepted.
Yeah. So no changes were decided by government on our English language testing arrangements. Again, understand, you know, there was an appetite from parts of the sector around, you know, online testing being made available for English to satisfy English language, but no decision was taken on that. So current requirements stand, and Minister Tudge, in one of the 5 announcements, 5 measures announced, obviously went to the further time being provided to recognise in the ELT space, but also biometrics and health checks, that we would be taking a very flexible approach to provide, you know, very extended time frames to allow for those disruptions. But current settings remain that students need to, as normal, go through those processes. Noting English language testing, of course, you know, with our external framework, about 75% roughly of the visa student caseload does not require English language testing. So it's about 25% of the caseload that we anticipate require that. But, you know, completely understand the impact there. I don't know if you have through your channels, but some of the English language testing providers, because we've got, you know, prescribed providers to do that for us, have identified some better capacities of late in terms of being able to accommodate. But I suppose, like everything, both here in Australia and in different parts of the world, we just need to caveat, you know, further disruptions are possible, right? You know, we might settle in a nice sort of run of capacity, whether it be ELT, biometric collection, or panel doctor health checks. And if there's spikes in COVID, you know, that picture does change. So current settings remain the same. Of course, if there's any developments there, and as we sort of recommence visa processing, and some of these are major hurdles, you know, we're always happy to of course, you know, get feedback on these and present issues both internally and to government to look where we can be flexible. But the decision was status quo on English at this time.
Thanks, Matthew. Can I ask a quick question about a technical question? A student studying offshore without COE, without student visa, now wants to apply for a student visa. So should the course commencement date on the COE be July or next year, February 2021? So a student started their online study in July without COE.
Yeah. Look, I think you know, I think the COE should just clearly be for their course duration. So whether it's in an online or a face-to-face environment.
Right, that's good. Thanks.
Yeah. The important thing for us in a visa sense is to also, with the COE, to get that end date as correct as possible, so we can, you know, ensure that we give a full duration on a visa. But I would also suggest that the online offshore stuff is incorporated in that COE where possible as well.
Thank you, Matthew. John Chiu from Boxhill Institute. So that question, your answer actually related to some of the existing applications where their COEs might be submitted earlier, and in because of the stop of processing, that might cause the, you know, whether I think some of the students are asking whether new COEs need to be issued or not. So if based on your view, you only look at the ending of the course, then we probably don't need to reissue the COE.
Yeah, look, I think that's our preference. Obviously, you know, COEs, that we've got to have a sort of sensible interpretation of how long, you know, and then I think we usually work on a, obviously, you know, normal is that, you know, the COE hasn't started yet and we grant the visa, etc. We hope to come out with some clear advice on this, but where possible, I think we would come from the perspective of having to limit, wanting for yourselves to limit how many COEs you're needing to do, noting the sort of administrative impost for you. And so where we can, we're going to be flexible on that. And I hope to come out with some clear advice on that in terms of, you know, COEs that, you know, were 3-6 months or whatever, we're okay with. If they go beyond that, we might ask for a new COE in an exceptional circumstance. So that's how we're kind of thinking at this point in time. But very much hope to come out with some clear advice on that, so you know where you stand administratively.
Yeah, that'll be excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. And also that relate to that though, if they were still in the time of your allowed period of time, you know, that commenced, as visa still hasn't been issued, will you still then make that 6 months duration automatically add on to their visa, giving that 6 months possibly is something that you may be considered?
If the COE has that 6 months added on to
because otherwise they may have to extend afterwards where they come here. So for the ones like, they may be ended like say June 2023. And then you might consider to them giving to the end of the year 2023.
Oh, I see what you mean. I mean, we would probably, so at this point in time, in terms of what we usually do, so if a student is ending their course in a sort of calendar year, say a November-ish type time, as you know, we will grant through to 15th of March to allow that sort of period. And if they're sort of, if it's a shorter course and finishing mid-year, etc., we usually give a month. That's what we usually do. Now, I don't anticipate that we would look to, I suppose, if I get your question right, sort of add on, you know, 6 months to allow for a possible disruption. We would probably only do that if we knew via a COE from yourselves that disruption had been realised.
That's what I mean. So if the students are, you know, the COE previously submitted was to commence 1st of July 2020, right? And then because of disruption, and if they're not submitting a new COE because their visa maybe have been assessing now, and then giving that automatically we'll be looking at least 6 months kind of, you know, not allowed to travel, and the course already started 1st of July. So that might be ended, let's say, previously will be visa ended 15th of March 2020, let's say. no, 2023 March. And then you might extend that to the one more, you know, a little bit earlier, because they will only finish that course later when they come to on board.
Yeah. So I think that would be a matter of you getting us the updated COE before we made that decision on that visa, to give you that extended time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So updated COE is still required.
In that scenario, yeah. Just to ensure, I suppose that in general terms, you know, the end of the COE is the date that we will pin towards on the visa grant. So we can't go beyond that, other than, like I said, that 15th of March, or that 1 month at this stage. So it would require, before visa grant, that new COE. If that didn't happen and they came on shore and did their study, and, you know, at some point, you know, their course was going to go beyond their visa validity, that's when we would welcome another visa application made in Australia, and they would avail themselves of the nil back in that circumstance.
Yeah. So they have two options. Yeah. Thank you.
Two options. Yeah. If that makes sense. Yeah. Great.
Thank you, Chan.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks. Any more questions?
This is Michelle Fernandez from Holmes Glen Institute in Melbourne. Just a question on the form and the signature from the education provider. Does those signatures need to be one of the PRISM's administrators, or we nominate a signatory for that form?
Yeah, look, we're happy for you guys to nominate a signatory. I haven't got the form up in front of me, but I think it's you know, fairly broad in interpretation. So yeah, we would just appreciate, I suppose, you know, I think we asked for a contact number or email address of the person signing, just on the very rare occasion that we might want to sort of check details if, you know, we don't have enough information or something. So you know, it would probably be good from our perspective, especially with some of the bigger providers, if there was some consistent approach there. It's just a point of contact for us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
We're getting to the end of our hour. We have 5 more minutes. Would people have any final questions? Otherwise, we might give everybody 5 minutes back to their workday. No, all good. Well, I think we've exhausted our questions to you and our feedback. So we also are considering putting some of our feedback in writing, so that you can have that more officially. Once again, many thanks for making yourself available. That's really, really great for us. We really appreciate your time. We know how busy you are, and everybody wants to talk to you about the new visa package, and to your team as well. So thanks a lot, and we will be in touch, and I will finish the meeting now. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Have a lovely day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
And yes.
Thanks, Matthew.
Best of luck to the Victorians.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.